It's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight. Coming up, calls to make prison work for women and put them on an even footing with male inmates. We've seen figures that suggest women leaving prison are half as likely as men to land a job within 6 months. Unemployment is one of the main causes of reoffending, and the government knows it has a problem to fix. Tonight, we have a special report from our home editor, Jason Farrell, inside the women's prison, trying to equip inmates with the skills to cope on the outside. Also ahead, incredible stories of endurance and survival in the Boxing Day tsunami. A new documentary tells the story of one of the deadliest natural disasters in history through the eyes of those who lived it. I'll be joined by two of them in the studio tonight. Plus, 1,100 jobs at risk as Vauxhall's owner announces plans to close its plant in Luton. We'll be there live. And Glastonbury announces its first act for 2025. So Rod Stewart lands the famous Sunday legend slot on Worthy Farm. All that to come and much more on the UK Tonight. But first tonight, a major development in the conflict in the Middle East, as the Israeli Prime Minister says he is ready to implement a ceasefire with Hezbollah in Lebanon. Speaking a little earlier this evening, Benjamin Netanyahu said the Israeli Security Cabinet has signed off on the deal, and he will recommend that his full cabinet does the same.
Tonight, I will bring to the Cabinet for approval an outline for a ceasefire in Lebanon. The duration of the ceasefire depends on what will happen in Lebanon. In full understanding with the United States, we maintain full military freedom of action. If Hezbollah violates the agreement and tries to arm itself, we will attack. If it tries to renew terrorist infrastructure near the border, we will attack.
Let's go live to Jerusalem. Our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle is standing by to react to this news because, Alistair, it's important to point out that it's not there yet, but we're led to believe by Benjamin Netanyahu it is close. Just put this into context for us.
Yeah, I think the Security Cabinet meeting is still ongoing, although actually about a minute ago I looked and it was being reported in some Hebrew media outlets that the deal has been agreed and will come into force at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, but there's been no official announcement yet. I think that's important to stress, either from the Israeli side, the Lebanese side, or from Washington. The Americans have been an integral part of the negotiations that have been going on, and we're expecting the US President Joe Biden to speak outside the White House at any moment now, really. He was due to speak about half an hour ago, but that's been delayed, probably in coordination with events over here. So it is looking very likely that a ceasefire will be agreed between Israel and Hezbollah. That would see an end to the fighting, at least in the short term, and would see the pulling back of Hezbollah forces from the border areas around southern Lebanon, and then in turn the withdrawal of Israeli forces. But a lot of skepticism and doubt about whether or not now is the right timing from an Israeli perspective, whether Hezbollah have been sufficiently degraded, and whether or not enough can be done to prevent them from rearming and returning to the border areas. So, you know, this deal, and let's assume that it is about to be announced, this deal is certainly not universally popular here in Israel. There are skeptics amongst the Israeli population. There are dissenters within the Israeli cabinet itself. I think it's a different story, though, over in Lebanon. I've been speaking to people there throughout the day. The general population is desperate for a ceasefire, desperate for the bombardments to end. And I think from a Hezbollah perspective, they now are in a position where they have been hammered over a number of months, and they want to retreat, lick their wounds, and we'll see whether or not they have attempted to try and rearm.
Alistair, thank you. Alistair Bunkle with the latest there from Jerusalem. We'll keep you updated on that developing situation throughout the evening and into the night here on Sky News. Now, worrying figures suggest that women being released from prison are at a significant disadvantage to their male counterparts. Life behind bars is supposed to be part punishment, part rehabilitation. But statistics show that women are half as likely as men to find a job within 6 months of their release. Ex-prisoners with a job are far less likely to reoffend. And our home editor, Jason Farrell, has visited a prison in Cheshire taking a hands-on approach to preparing inmates for the outside world.
Go inside Style Prison near Manchester, and in the far corner of the estate there's a workshop. What happens here looks destructive, but amid the smash and clatter, something is being rebuilt. These women's lives, one broken TV at a time.
When I came in here, it looked like everyone was in the gym. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Does that help?
Yeah, do you know what? It does. It just... You get a lot of frustration out, because obviously a lot of us have got a lot of anger, do you know what I mean?
Here they're learning skills that could stop them coming back. 6 months after leaving prison, women are half as likely as men to be employed, and people without work are more likely to re-offend.
So if they do 70 a day, they earn £10.
Right.
Yeah.
Yvonne is the first former prisoner at Style who now has keys to the prison, employed here as workshop manager.
What are you trying to give to these women?
I'm trying to give them a future. I'm trying to give them some hope that they can get their children back, find a job, find a home, and there is a different life. There is light at the end of the tunnel.
Wrapped in high fences and barbed wire are austere Victorian houses, once an orphanage, now the accommodation blocks of Style Prison. The only soft thing here is Ted, the prison cat. It's a female prison, but often a man has had some influence on their crimes.
90% of the women in prison, that there's always a male involved in why they've committed crime. Yeah. Obviously speaking personally, because it is the case with me as well, so, yeah.
Female prisoners have different demons to men. 60% will have experienced domestic violence. Many have known physical or sexual abuse as a child. For Yvonne, though, the hardest thing was being jailed as a mother.
The biggest thing for me was leaving my children. Yeah. I still carry that guilt around. Why I came to prison 3 times and left them 3 times, I don't know, but I did.
This programme, Recycling TV Sets, is called Recycling Lives. And it continues on the outside in their depot in Preston. It's food they're recycling from supermarkets and farms to community food banks.
Yeah, no matter where they are in their life or what they're doing, they choose to come here every day and do
Here we meet Naomi, who 3 years since being released from jail now runs this warehouse.
I was put in prison when my baby was only 3 months old, so it was like losing an arm, like losing a piece of my DNA.
In and out of prison since she was 15, she was first jailed for breaching an ASBO and feels even short prison sentences can ruin lives.
They take women who've robbed a block of cheese to feed the child, they put them in prison for 28 days, they take the home, they take the kids, they lose their family, and they get out with nothing. You've just created a criminal right there. You've just created a woman who's got nothing to lose.
Yeah. So they're more likely to re-offend?
No reason not to. You're also releasing them with a sleeping bag and a tent and telling them to go and sleep in the woods.
It's why, with women being mostly non-violent offenders serving short sentences, the government is setting up a Women's Justice Board to explore reducing the number who go to prison and how to offer better rehabilitation.
There are a lot more factors that the women have to contend with. There's children, there's maybe domestic abuse, there's domestic violence. And when you change a woman's life, you're often changing the family's life, you're changing the children's life.
Prison is supposed to be part punishment, part repair job. But there are few programmes like this, and for many women, jail is adding to the damage. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
Well, former inmate Scarlett Robert joins me now in the studio. Scarlett, good of you to come in and talk to us. You were in prison for 4 months. You were released in 2022, and I know you do a lot of work on this side now, talking about rehabilitation and penal reform. We were just watching that report together and talking about that prison in Cheshire, and you said there was none of that in the prison I was in.
Correct.
That's very much an outlier.
Yes.
In providing women with opportunities.
Yes. So I think in terms of rehabilitation, in the Birdman of Alcatraz, a prisoner says to his jailer, what is the meaning of rehabilitation? And the jailer doesn't know, and the prisoner explains, it's to reinvest with dignity. There is no such thing as dignity for women in prisons in the UK. From being forced to strip naked and defecate in front of strangers, to being deprived of access to sanitary products and oftentimes toilet paper, to being forced to withdraw from prescription medication without clinical supervision, being kept in prolonged periods of pain because there's no access to pain relief or primary health care. Then we release women homeless and without jobs 6 months later and expect them to be a better version than they were 6 months ago when they were taken away from their own children, perhaps. It's simply not possible. And the difference between men's and women's prisons, so men's prisons are categorised from A through to D, D being an open prison, which is either for people on determinate sentences preparing for release, or for people who've committed crimes of less severity. Women's prisons are open or closed, and of those, there's only 2 open prisons. 10 prisons are closed, which means we're kept under the highest security measures, locked in for 23 hours a day. So for that reason, rehabilitation is impossible. If you're locked inside a space the size of a bathroom for 23 hours a day, it's simply not possible to rehabilitate with any kind of meaningful activity.
Do you think women should be treated differently to men when it comes to sentencing and prison as a consideration? Because we heard there in Jason's report that women tend to be given shorter sentences for the nature of their crimes. They're not violent, the majority of them. But do you think women should get treated differently to men when it comes to the justice system?
Absolutely not. Not in terms of sentencing. No, of course not. The sentencing council guidelines are there for all, and they should be fair across both sexes.
But should there be other opportunities for them? Because, you know, in that report there, we're talking about the fact that, you know, there is less rehabilitation opportunities for women. The impact on women can be different because they can often, you know, the lion's share of the home falls to them, the children. The impact on women going to prison can be, perhaps it's suggested, more devastating.
Assuming they're a primary caregiver, yes. I mean, things like, for example, 72% of all TV licence convictions are awarded to women. I mean, that doesn't seem representative.
Their names on the bill and
possibly,
you know,
but
and
that
they pay the
doesn't
direct
seem
debit
fair to criminalise somebody for something like that. And like you say, 68% of all female offenders are non-violent, but they're imprisoned anyways. For me, prison should be for the most serious and prolific offenders. It's about protecting the public and possibly the offender themselves. And let's not forget the victim. They should always be factored into sentencing.
What's the stigma when you come out of prison? Because the statistics we were talking about as well in the lead up to Jason's report is that, you know, women are less likely to get a job 6 months on from release. So what's it like as a woman coming out from prison trying to look for work? Is there a different stigma?
Yeah.
What's stopping you from having the same chances as men?
You were given a determinate sentence by a judge. Hopefully you serve that sentence with grace and dignity. You do your time. In theory, once that sentence is finished, you should be able to reintegrate. Thanks to things like the tabloids, for example, you're given a life sentence because of that. You know, one Google search, I was offered a job about 6 months after my release, and I was about a week before starting, and then they pulled it, assuming that they Googled me. You know, so this is why I advocate now. I've made it very public about my history, and I advocate for penal reform because people should be able to turn a page. Nobody is the sum of, you know, nobody is equal to their worst mistake they've ever made, just as much as nobody's equal to the best work they've ever done. So if somebody's made a mistake and they've served their punishment, they should be allowed to turn a page and rehabilitate and become a functioning, productive member of society.
The government recognise there is a problem. There's this talk of the Women's Justice Board.
Yes.
What do you want them to do?
I think resourcing for women's prisons is a problem. So like I say, we don't have the resources to give women the same categorisation as men, the same opportunity to rehabilitate, because it's closed prisons. They're old Victorian warehouse buildings. They're mostly policed by men, which even for me, I never suffered abuse prior to incarceration, but 60% of women have suffered physical or sexual abuse at the hands of a man prior to being imprisoned. So to be policed 24/7 by men does feel really uncomfortable, especially when you're exposed. You know, they can look in through your cell window at any time. You might be getting changed. You might be on the toilet. It's really dehumanising. So I'd like the Women's Justice Board to take into account that women have very different needs to men. And we're not to be treated with special conditions. We're not to be given exceptional treatment, but just that we're different.
Just to understand.
Yeah.
OK. Scarlett, really good of you to come in and talk to us. Scarlett Roberts there, reacting to Jason Farrell's report about female prisoners. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Well, we did ask the Ministry of Justice to comment on Scarlett's account of life in a women's prison. They haven't provided a response to us this evening, but they did respond to Jason's report. The Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, said this: for many women, prison isn't working. Most women in prison are victims themselves. Over half are mothers, with a prison sentence separating parent and child. That's why I'm establishing a new Women's Justice Board tasked with reducing the number of women in prison by exploring alternatives to custody for female offenders. In other news tonight, the owner of Vauxhall says it plans to shut its van factory in Luton, which is putting more than 1,000 jobs at risk. Stellantis say it's hoping to transfer some of these roles to its facility in Ellesmere Port. Our business correspondent Paul Casso joins me now from Luton. An unsettling time for those that work there, Paul. What do we know for sure at the moment?
Yeah, we know for sure that the gates of this factory behind me, which has been producing vehicles for Vauxhall since 1905, would you believe, we know that its 120th year is going to be its last. Stellantis, which is the multinational that owns Vauxhall, among other brands, including Peugeot and Fiat, has decided to close this plant. It was due to move from producing its diesel Vivaro van, it's a white van, medium-sized white van. It was going to start making its electric model here from next year, but it's been examining its European and its UK operations. It's got factories all across the continent. It's got another plant at Ellesmere Port where it currently makes small white vans. They come in other colours, I'm sure, but small commercial vehicles, essentially. It's going to move the Vivaro to Ellesmere Port, so some good news. But the axe is going to fall here, and that means 1,100 jobs are in threat. Some roles will transition to Ellesmere Port, but that's 170 miles away. How practical that is and quite how many will survive is a moot point. And you can imagine for the workers here, the unions who've been negotiating with Stellantis through this process and in a previous round of threats to the factory just 3 years ago, this is a heavy blow. We spoke earlier to the Unite coordinator, Gary Ray.
I think it's a decision that doesn't have to be made. I think we need a political solution here. I think the government need to step in to see what can be done to safeguard the long-term future of the Luton site. We've been here for 120 years and we want it to continue. It's going to have a major impact on the economy in the town. We're one of the main employers within Luton as well, and that's going to be potentially lost if we don't find a solution.
Now, there are many reasons why Stellantis has reached this decision, but the one it's chosen to put the blame on today, with timing that doesn't feel like a coincidence, is the government's plans to transition to phasing out diesel and petrol cars by 2030. That's faster than most of the continent of Europe, which has got 2035. Crucially, the government has got targets for the proportion of vehicles that manufacturers like Vauxhall must produce each year that have to be electric, a sort of roadmap to the full adoption of electric vehicles. And manufacturers, not just Vauxhall, have been saying all year that these targets are too stretching. 22% of cars this year need to be electric, and manufacturers are saying they're only going to hit 18 or 19%. Why? Because they believe the market just isn't there at the moment. They're going to produce cars that consumers just aren't yet ready to buy. Either they don't trust the charging network or they're simply too expensive. There are no incentives for private buyers, no grants or subsidies to help the market move along. This decision was announced just a few hours before Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary, was due to tell the motor industry at their big annual dinner this evening in London that he will review those targets. So this is a hammer blow, not just to the workers here, but to the government. This is what Jonathan Reynolds told Parliamentary Committee earlier today. His response was:
to rationalise operations at Ellesmere Port is, to be frank, a better outcome than it could have been, because Stellantis has significant overcapacity, you will know, across its European footprint, so we could have lost those two key lines to a different factory. The fact they're going to Ellesmere Port and there's going to be a £50-60 million, I understand, investment in the paint shop to do that. Of course, that bit is good news, but I wouldn't want to give any other impression than I believe this is a very difficult day for people in Luton, and of course the department will be giving them full support.
The message that it could have been worse is no consolation to workers here in Luton, welcome though it may be in Ellesmere Port. But this is now a fundamental challenge to this government. They were elected on a promise to deliver green growth and jobs as the UK transitions towards net zero, away from existing technologies like petrol and diesel to new cars. But the market doesn't appear to be ready. Manufacturers are reluctant, and this government already faces something of a crisis of confidence from business. This is a big moment for the UK car industry and the new government.
Paul, thank you. Paul Kelso live in Luton for us tonight. Russia has barred UK cabinet ministers, including the Deputy Prime Minister and the Chancellor, from entering the country after expelling a British diplomat and accusing him of spying. Moscow says the sanctions are in response to what it calls hostile actions. The Foreign Office says the claims against the diplomat are baseless. Well, let's get more on this story. Our Moscow correspondent Ivor Bennett is standing by. Ivor.
Yeah, evening. So a busy day for British interests in Russia with this expulsion. We had also an ambassadorial summoning and then these multiple blacklistings. None of them have been explicitly linked to the permission given by Britain to Ukraine for them to fire British long-range missiles into Russian territory. But it's hard not to see these as being related, coming just a week after that green light was given to Kyiv. First of all, on the blacklistings, 30 British citizens, mostly from within the cabinet, have been banned from entering Russia. We're talking about the Chancellor Rachel Reeves, Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner among them, for what Moscow calls their anti-Russian activities. Practically, this won't mean very much, given that I'm sure none of these ministers plan to visit Russia anytime soon, and no UK ministers have done for some time since before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, so it's more symbolic. And I think it is almost certainly part of Russia's response to this permission on long-range missiles last week, which Moscow sees as marking the start of Britain's direct involvement, they say, in the war in Ukraine. And I think the expulsion of the diplomat is also related to the very public summoning of Britain's ambassador here to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. When Nigel Casey, the ambassador, arrived at the ministry, here he is. These images are from Russian state media. There were Russian television crews and Russian TV reporters waiting for him in what felt like a coordinated campaign to make this development and these accusations regarding the diplomat as public as possible. The diplomat in question was accused of providing false information when he entered the country and also accused of spying. No evidence was provided to back that up, and the Foreign Office, the UK Foreign Office, called the claims malicious and baseless. Why would they want to publicise them so much, though? I think it's an attempt to shape public opinion here, to paint Britain as the enemy, doubling down on that language we heard last week from the Kremlin, accusing Britain of attacking Russia, and all part of their narrative of claiming that Russia is the innocent party here. It all feeds into that.
Ivor Bennett in Moscow, thank you. Still to come on the UK tonight, the new documentaries telling the stories of the Boxing Day tsunami through the eyes of those who lived it.
It's like a football final with only one team on the pitch. This isn't just a call to vote, but a call to remember. The freedom fought for by the African National Congress.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa.
A cyclone and 2 burst dams wiped out hundreds of generational homes.
This was the second dam that the floodwaters hit before it tore into Derna. We are in the heart of Nairobi, and we're watching as protesters were heavily tear gassed.
The sheer fearlessness and persistence of these guys is astonishing.
We help you understand the world with us. I remember going into the iconic Omdurman market in the heart of Sudan's capital for the first time since the war started. And this is what's left of it. Bullet holes through buildings, shelled balconies, bullet cases on the floor. I witnessed the complete destruction of a place linked to my childhood memories and the lives of millions of people. This is insane. This was a bustling residential area. So many friends who lived here. My most memorable interview was with a 15-year-old boy who'd survived being stranded on a migrant boat on its way from Senegal to the Canary Islands.
After 13 days, our food, water and fuel supply ran out.
I felt awe when we saw the mountain gorillas in Rwanda.
We call him the king of the jungle. This is the alpha silverback.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky News.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Welcome back. Now, Boxing Day marks 20 years since the Indian Ocean tsunami. More than 220,000 people died in 14 countries in one of the deadliest natural disasters in recorded history. While survivors of that disaster and those who responded to it have been sharing their stories in a new documentary series released on National Geographic this week. And some of their accounts are barely believable.
Suddenly I can see this really high water. And I just like, what is that?
The 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami was like no other. It was equivalent to 23,000 Hiroshima-type atomic bombs.
I remember the feeling of the wave passing on my face. It's like immense force.
Well, I'm joined now in the studio by Rachel Harrison. She was on holiday in Koh Phi Phi in Thailand when the tsunami hit. And Sky News cameraman Phil Hooper is also here with us. He was in Indonesia filming for Sky News after that disaster. Welcome both. Rachel, where to start? Even just from that short clip, it's a reminder of just the scale of what happened that day, and you were there. Why did you want to get involved in this documentary 20 years on to relive it almost?
I think it felt to me as though it was very much of an unfinished story, in that what I experienced on that day was very one-dimensional, very much about my fight for survival and then the kind of aftermath helping people. But I don't think I ever really understood what had happened, the context and the build-up. And I think the thing that gives me the biggest shock is actually seeing the water, the surge of water, and thinking to myself, how did I actually survive that? Because it was so incredible, such a force of nature. And, you know, I was dragged underwater, yet somehow managed to come up and survive. So I think for me, it's about telling the story and sort of, in a way, because it was a very different world back then as well. I don't think nobody had smartphones in the way that they do now, so we weren't alerted to this disaster happening.
Yeah. That's what you get a sense of from the documentary, is all of the individual stories. It's like a jigsaw puzzle, because as I said, the scale of this, to be reminded of that, it is literally unfathomable. And this documentary takes you through it minute by minute with the wave and where it hit 14 countries, lost nearly 250,000 people during that. You were there with your partner on holiday, Cece, and you were in a marketplace when the wave hit, and everybody that speaks this documentary was in a different place, you know, doing a different thing, and, you know, just building a picture of just an ordinary day, an ordinary day in the life. Let's just listen to your husband Cece's account of what happened.
And at this point in time, I'm holding out hope against hope that she's made it. Because I know full well that she's a very strong swimmer. But deep, deep, deep down in my heart, I think she's dead. when the wave hit, we were walking through the marketplace. As the water started to go above my chest, I looked for Rachel, and I reached out and I grabbed the straps of her bikini top. The straps broke, and she went sailing past me. After the water subsided, I just headed back to the hotel, screaming for Rachel, knowing in my heart of hearts she's not there.
But Rachel, you did survive, and so did your partner. And I think that's what this documentary underscores, is the lottery of that situation. Yeah. There's no rhyme or reason as to why some made it and others didn't. That was your partner's point of view. From your point of view, what was that like?
I think the point where I was dragged underwater, all I saw before I went underwater was 2 bungalows coming towards me. And then I went under with something really heavy on my head. And I couldn't breathe. And I thought, this is it. I'm going to die. Will anybody find out what happened to me? What happened to Cece? And I held my breath. Somehow, I don't know how long I was holding my breath for, but I held my breath. Eventually, I got a pocket of air, and I think the force of the water dragged me back out to sea again. So I popped up and was rescued by a little fishing boat. But all that time, I was thinking, what's happened to Cece? He's not a strong swimmer. He was hanging onto a tree. Could he even have survived that? I had no idea. I had no idea what had happened to me. It all happened so quickly that, you know, I couldn't really process it or take it in.
And how long was it until you found out what happened to Cece, until you found each other?
It was about 3 hours, so I was sitting on a boat. I begged the captain to take me back to the island, and they said, no, it's unsafe. There's another wave coming, so we can't take you. But eventually I nagged and nagged, and they took me back, and I picked my way across the island, sort of, you know, battered and bruised and with no shoes, across all this debris, because the island had been completely devastated. And I found him, and I think, as you'll see on the documentary, obviously I suddenly reappeared, and we were reunited, and we realised that somehow we'd both managed to survive.
There are those incredible stories of survival and people finding each other. And there are also those stories of incredible human kindness, those fishermen on that boat. Dangerous for them to take you back, but they did it. Such was your desperate situation.
Yeah.
Phil, you travelled to Indonesia as part of the Sky News crew. What did you walk into? At what point did you arrive?
I arrived in Indonesia about a week, 10 days after the tsunami had hit. When we flew in, it was just scenes of complete devastation from the air. You know, you had the coastal region, and where you could see the bases of houses, just the concrete plinths, and everything else was missing. And then from the airport, as we drove in to Banda Aceh, again, it was kind of driving through a movie disaster zone. There was just nothing. There was just the odd house that was still standing, and occasionally there was a boat on top of a house, and this is a mile inland from the sea. It was just, I mean, the devastation was just incredible, and the power of Mother Nature is immense, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. It was just, I mean, our job was there to try and help the people and, you know, either pick up the pieces and get their stories told.
Well, you were there with former Sky correspondent Ian Doverston, and you'd wandered off to get some additional shots, as cameramen do. I'm going to go over there and film and see what I can find, because, again, just bearing witness, taking it all in, And what did you find? What situation did you find yourself in? Because this, again, is another miracle story from something so awful.
We didn't have a plan that day of what to go and find. So we thought, OK, we'll go down to the beach and we'll see if we can find some fishermen who are kind of rebuilding, trying to find, you know, where their boats are in stock and things like that. And we ended up on a little kind of hillock on top of the beach. And in the distance, I saw, you know, what looked like a father and son walking towards us in the beach. And they got closer and closer, and I was filming them as they came along. And eventually they got to us, and there was a teenager with this kind of little 9-10-year-old boy. And our translator started talking to Martunis and hearing his story. And he had been wandering for 21 days. He still didn't know quite where he was because all the landmarks had disappeared.
Well, Phil, let's pick up with that report that you and Ian sent to us here at Sky News, picking up the point that you've just taken us to. Let's have a look.
We came across Martunis as we filmed on Banda Aceh Beach. A teenage boy had brought him over. We gave him food. He was eager to eat. The boy is just 7.5. He told our Indonesian helper how he and his parents had tried to escape the tsunami in a vehicle.
When tsunami coming, he tried to get the truck. And then he come into the truck, and then that truck already gone by tsunami also. And then he saw his parent getting by tsunami also.
Martunis is very thin, but he was alert. A member of our team was a Royal Marine Commando. He knew instantly that the boy needed to see a doctor, and quickly. He was thirsty, perhaps badly dehydrated. For almost 3 weeks, it seems he'd been living on puddle water and some dried noodles he'd found. It appears this young boy had watched helplessly as his mother and father were swept away from him. Martunis' story is quite simply miraculous. He's clearly in need of medical attention. He's turned up this morning, 19 days after the tsunami struck, and we're among the first to see him since then.
Remarkable, and Phil, Martunis was the last survivor to be rescued. What happened to him?
From there, we took him to Save the Children. They were doing the database on the survivors. The nurse there gave him a bath, and then we followed him to hospital. We left him in hospital, I think, in the hands of some Ukrainian doctors and nurses, and they were brilliant. And Ian and I, when we left, we were thought he's an orphan. It was heart-wrenching for us. We started editing. A couple of hours later, we had a phone call from Save the Children saying that they'd found his father.
And we've got footage of you, actually, of Martunis being reunited with his father who was the only other survivor out of his whole family. It seems like a very good point just to stop there on that good news point. We'll return to you in a moment. I've just got to take people to the White House because there's something happening here, a possible ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon. President Biden speaking. Let's listen in.
For nearly 14 months, a deadly conflict raged across the border that separates Israel and Lebanon. A conflict that began the day after the October 7 attack by Hamas on Israel. Hours later, at 2 a.m. in the morning, Hezbollah and other terrorist organizations backed by Iran attacked Israel in support of Hamas. Let's be clear, Israel did not launch this war. The Lebanese people did not seek that war either, nor did the United States. Over the past year, including the days immediately following October the 7th, I directed the U.S. military to flow assets and capabilities into the region, including aircraft carriers, fighter squadrons, and sophisticated air defense battery to defend Israel and deter our common enemy at critical moments. Since the war with Hezbollah began, over 70,000 Israelis have been forced to live in refugee live as refugees in their own country, helplessly watching their homes, their businesses, their communities as they're bombarded and destroyed. And over 300,000 Lebanese people have also been forced to live as refugees in their own country. In a war imposed on them by Hezbollah. All told, this has been the deadliest conflict between Israel and Hezbollah in decades. How many of Hezbollah's senior leaders are dead, including its longtime leader, Nasrallah? And Israel has destroyed Hezbollah's terrorist infrastructure in southern Lebanon as well, including miles of sophisticated tunnels, which were prepared for an October 7-style terrorist attack in northern Israel. But lasting security for the people of Israel and Lebanon cannot be achieved only on the battlefield. And that's why I directed my team to work with the governments of Israel and Lebanon to forge a ceasefire, to bring a conflict between Israel and Hezbollah to a close. Under the deal reached today, effective at 4 a.m. tomorrow local time, the fighting across the Lebanese-Israeli border will end. Will end. This is designed to be a permanent cessation of hostilities. What is left of Hezbollah and other terrorist organizations will not be allowed, well, I emphasize, will not be allowed to threaten the security of Israel again. Over the next 60 days, the Lebanese army and state security forces will deploy and take control of their own territory once again. Hezbollah terrorist infrastructure in southern Lebanon will not be allowed to be rebuilt. And over the next 60 days, Israel will gradually withdraw its remaining forces. And civilians on both sides will soon be able to safely return to their communities and begin to rebuild their homes, their schools, their farms, their businesses, and their very lives. We're determined this conflict will not be just another cycle of violence. And so the United States, with the full support of France and our other allies, has pledged to work with Israel and Lebanon to ensure that this arrangement is fully implemented, the agreement totally implemented. You know, there will be no U.S. troops deployed in southern Lebanon. This is consistent with my commitment to the American people to not put U.S. troops in combat in this conflict. Instead, we, along with France and others, will provide the necessary assistance to make sure this deal is implemented fully and effectively. Let me be clear. If Hezbollah or anyone else breaks the deal and poses a direct threat to Israel, then Israel retains the right to self-defense, consistent with international law, just like any country when facing a terrorist group pledged to that country's destruction. At the same time, this deal supports Lebanon's sovereignty, and so it heralds a new start for Lebanon, a country that I've seen most of over the years, a country with rich history and culture. If fully implemented, this deal can put Lebanon on a path toward a future that's worthy of its significant past. And just as the Lebanese people deserve a future of security and prosperity, so do the people of Gaza. They too deserve an end to the fighting and displacement. The people of Gaza have been through hell. Their world's absolutely shattered. Far too many civilians in Gaza have suffered, far too much. And Hamas has refused for months and months to negotiate a good faith ceasefire and a hostage deal. And so now Hamas has a choice to make. Their only way out is to release the hostages, including American citizens, which they hold. In the process, bring an end to the fighting, which would make possible a surge of humanitarian relief. Over the coming days, the United States will make another push with Turkey, Egypt, Qatar, Israel, and others to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza. With the hostages released and the end of the war without Hamas in power, that becomes possible. As for the broader Middle East region, today's announcement brings us closer to realizing the affirmative agenda that I've been pushing forward during my entire presidency. A vision for the future of the Middle East where it's at peace and prosperous and integrated across borders. A future where Palestinians have a state of their own, one that fulfills its people's legitimate aspirations, one that cannot threaten Israel or harbor terrorist groups with backing from Iran. A future where Israelis and Palestinians enjoy equal measures of security, prosperity, and yes, dignity. To that end, the United States remains prepared to conclude a set of historic deals with Saudi Arabia, to include a security pact and economic assurances, together with a credible pathway for establishing a Palestinian state and the full normalization of relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel, a desire they both have. I believe this agenda remains possible, and in my remaining time in office, I'll work tirelessly to advance this vision for an integrated, secure, and prosperous region, all of which strengthens America's national security. Getting all this done will require making some hard choices. Israel has been bold on the battlefield. Iran and its proxies have paid a very heavy price. Now Israel must be bold in turning tactical gains against Iran and its proxies into a coherent strategy that secure Israel's long-term safety and advances a broader peace and prosperity in the region. Today's announcement is a critical step in advancing that vision. And so I applaud the crazy decision made by the leaders of Lebanon and Israel to end the violence. It reminds us that peace is possible. Say that again, peace is possible. As long as that is the case, I will not for a single moment stop working to achieve it. God bless you all, and sorry to keep you waiting so long. May God protect our troops. Thank you.
Well, let's bring in our US correspondent James Matthews, who is live for us in Washington and was listening in there to President Biden's speech. So we're not expecting anything in terms of an update from Israel this evening, perhaps into tomorrow morning. But what did we get from President Biden's speech there, James?
Hi, Sarah-Jane. I think we got a claim from President Biden of credit for developments that have we've seen in the past 24 hours. America has put much effort in terms of shuttle diplomacy into making this happen. Biden, a man who's been short on results in the Middle East, clearly wanted to take the credit, wanted to emphasize that the job wasn't done, and spoke about peace being possible, spoke about Saudi and Israeli relations, that happening, a Palestinian state, all those ambitions that he and others have long held, but he has failed to steer towards any kind of reality over the long, dark months. What he didn't say was to address any of the kind of detail that we're hearing here in terms of America leaning on Israel to get to where we are now. There was much talk here, indeed it's being reported, that the Americans said to Israel they would withhold the supply of particular weapons, though very effective one-ton bombs, by way of putting pressure on Israel to reach an agreement. Biden didn't touch on that, and no real talk about what went on behind the scenes, what made Israel lend a listening ear this time when they have not in the past. He spoke optimistically, didn't he, about the chance that he might yet be able to steward this situation towards a peace deal. I can tell you the guidance that we're getting here, Sarah-Jane, from US officials is that the chances of what we see today in Lebanon happening in Gaza are very slim indeed. And it may be that that day happens following the advent of a new regime and a new president of the United States. It may well be that Donald Trump inherits the benefit of long months of hard graft, and it must be said a trajectory which is upward at the moment, and certainly in terms of the positive commentary on this, it is de-escalation when all the talk and all the fear was of escalation.
James, thank you. James Matthews with the latest from Washington. We'll keep you up to date on that story throughout the evening here on Sky News. And now, just before we went to the White House, we were talking about the 20th anniversary of the Boxing Day tsunami. And Phil was in the middle of telling us a story about Martinus, the last survivor to be rescued in Indonesia, that young boy, eventually reunited with his father, who was the only other survivor out of his whole family. A remarkable story, but it doesn't end there. So I really want to finish this incredible story of this young man that you helped to rescue.
No, I mean, Ian's script ended all about hope, and it's been the story that just keeps on giving. After the story went out, we got a phone call in the newsroom from the Portuguese FA giving Martinus €10,000 because
he'd been wearing a Portuguese shirt when he was found.
And then, because he was such a big fan of Figo, they flew him out for the start of an international match, and he walked out as the mascot, the Portuguese mascot. And it doesn't stop there. He grew up to actually be a good footballer, and Ronaldo sponsored him to go and play at Sporting Lisbon, where he spent a few years until sadly he became injured. And he's no longer there, but he's back in Banda with a wife and a beautiful daughter.
That is a wonderful note to end on. Phil, thank you so much for that, telling us the story of Martinus, that young boy that you found in Indonesia, the last survivor of the tsunami there. Thank you so much, Phil Hooper, Sky News cameraman, and Rachel Herson, who survived the tsunami as well. Remarkable stories. Thank you so much for sharing them tonight. Thank you. So to come on the programme. A year on before the first test in Perth, are the Ashes mind games already underway? How's it only a year to go? And more after the break.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. Free wherever you get your news.
I'm Mark Stone, and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C. Sky News, get the full story first.
I'm Katie Spencer, and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent.
I'm Lisa Dowd, and I'm one of Sky's Midlands correspondents. The reason I do this job is because you never know where it's going to lead.
Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends.
We've got a heck of a race. This is when the Premier League properly clicks into gear. With the reigning champions against perhaps their most likely challengers. Liverpool, Manchester City, the summit meeting of English football's top two.
Liverpool, Manchester City on USA.
I'm Martha Kellner, and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. Sky News, the full story first.
I'm Martin Brunt, and I'm Sky's crime correspondent.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
Free wherever you get your news. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Hello, welcome back. Teddy is here with the sport. And this time next year, the first Ashes test will have just finished in Perth, if our timings have if I've worked that out right. But the mind games apparently have already started. It's going to be a long 12 months or so, isn't it?
Yeah, Joe Root will be big, you think, for England. Fifth in the all-time test scoring stats. He's England's highest scorer of all time. But according to Darren Lehmann, the former Australia coach, who's actually working on a series between India and Australia, he is not on the rung of the all-time greats. He's just below that because he hasn't scored in Australia Australia. So it's a strange time because Australia are playing India. England have got a first test coming up against New Zealand in Christchurch, but I suppose it just emphasises the magnitude of this rivalry. Joe Root's been very magnanimous. He's very understated generally. He says, well, my job is to do my work in the middle and get some runs, and Darren's job is to talk on radio and give his opinion. So he can carry on doing that.
Perfect response.
Yeah.
What is it about the Ashes that always delivers these new rivalries and storylines?
I think, well, it's just that England-Australia thing, isn't it? A new country was born in the 19th century. They came back in the 1880s and they really bloodied the nose of England, W.G. Grace and co. in there. And it set in motion this sort of underdog story when actually, though, as a smaller country, Australia seems to almost adopted the game more enthusiastically than England. Certainly got better weather. They can play more often. They've won more series, 34 to England's 32. We had that huge gap, nearly 20 years, that England finally put right in 2005, didn't we? So there's a magic to this series, and it just feels like it's going to continue. And next winter, our winter, their summer in Australia, it's going to be nearly 10 years, or 10 years since England last won the Ashes. So again, there's that little storyline there, and I think it'll be huge either way it goes. But very tough place to win, a tough place to score runs, and hopefully Joe Root gets that first century from England's perspective and they get the victory.
Sledging has already started.
It certainly has, yeah. We've got to stay tuned for more of that. Meanwhile, in the Champions League, get Manchester City and Arsenal in action. We'll tell you about it in just a second.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
You got more chance of winning the lottery than making it as a professional footballer.
I think your responsibility is to guide them in the same direction as I went myself.
Things aren't just handed to you on a plate. I think you have to fight for them, and it's probably only the tough that survive, really.
Natural skills is not enough. The impact has to be straight away.
Don't let anyone tell you what you can and can't.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Time for a quick look at the weather before we go. There will be some rain in the south tonight and tomorrow, which may lead to some disruption. Before then, mainly dry this evening with an early frost in the north. For southwest England will be wet and blustery. Rain, locally heavy, is going to spread across more of southern Britain tonight, with a brisk wind developing in the far south. Most other places looking dry, but there'll be a widespread frost and some dense fog patches. Rain over southern parts will become increasingly confined to eastern England tomorrow morning.